So we're going to consider a nice little challenge now that we know how to find surface area and volumes of spheres. Consider the logo for Sherwin Williams paint. The logo shows enough paint to cover the earth made by Sherwin Williams, a very bold claim. It also has a gargantuanly sized paint bucket, one that is approximately the size of these continents at the bottom of the earth here, that contains enough paint to cover the earth. What I want to know is, are the proportions of this logo reasonable? In order to accomplish that, we need to figure out a few things. First, how much paint will it take to cover the earth? All paint companies have recommendations for how many gallons you need to cover a certain amount of square feet or a certain amount of area of walls. In order to figure out how much paint we'll need, we're going to need to figure out the surface area of the earth. That in turn is going to require us to find the radius of the earth. Which you will have to look up online. Additionally, we're going to make some assumptions. We are going to assume that the Earth is a perfectly smooth sphere. Technically, the Earth bulges a little bit at the equator. Technically, the Earth isn't perfectly smooth. Technically, we have a lot of oceans, which would actually be difficult to physically paint. But assume that the Earth is a perfectly smooth sphere that is uniformly paintable. If it makes you feel any better, you can assume that we have bulldozed the entire Earth down to sea level. We've covered the entire thing with a layer of drywall, and now it is all ready to paint. As long as we know the surface area of the Earth, we'll know how much surface area we'll have to paint. Once we have the surface area of the Earth, we can then figure out how much paint it will take to cover the Earth. That'll give us a volume in gallons. Secondly, we're going to need to convert those gallons from whatever Sherwin Williams recommends as the number of gallons needed to cover this many square units of the Earth's surface into a more usable volume. Likely gallons into maybe meters cubed or cubic feet. There are ratios that can pull this off. You can use a conversion directly online as well. So we figured out what the surface area of the Earth was. We used Sherwin-Williams recommendations to figure out how much paint it would take to cover that much surface area. That usually probably gets us a number of gallons of paint we'll have to purchase. And then we converted those gallons into meters cubed or feet cubed. 3. We need to find the volume of the paint can. Now, obviously, I do not know what the volume of this paint can is. There are no measurements that are listed. However, I can compare the measurements of the paint can to the measurements of the logo itself. This distance is the diameter of the paint can. This distance is the diameter of the Earth. I could measure this distance and compare it to this distance on this logo. If I know what the diameter of the Earth is, because I had to find the radius of the Earth over here, I could use proportions to solve for what is going to be the radius of this gargantuan-sized paint can hanging out in space. Likewise, I can do the same thing for the height. This distance is the height of the paint can compared to the diameter of the Earth. That will get me the dimensions of the paint can. So find dimensions of can by comparing to Earth in logo and making a proportion. Put another way, logo diameter over logo Earth should equal the real diameter, if you were to actually make this thing, divided by real Earth. Lastly, once we have the dimensions of this logo paint can, we need to find the volume of the can. If we find the dimensions of the can and we find its volume, we then want to see, could this size can contain enough paint to indeed cover the entire Earth? So consider this a challenge. This is not a required assignment. This is not going to be turned in for a grade. But if you find yourself with some time to kill and looking for an interesting math problem or just an interesting application of the stuff that we're working with, consider trying to figure out if this paint can could contain enough paint to indeed cover the Earth.